When the highest law enforcement officer in the nation uses live television to threaten a sitting member of Congress, that's not politics, it's power unchecked. And when that moment is caught on camera, every American watching suddenly realizes something has gone terribly wrong. Because what happened between former Attorney General Pam Bondi and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett wasn't just a war of words, it was a moment that cracked open a much bigger story about accountability, intimidation, and how far power will go when it's challenged in public. Crockett didn't back down. She didn't hide behind advisors or rehearse talking points.
A record that had been held by another racist in this country. As he shouted that, he said something about the fact that this should not be about left versus right. It should be about right versus wrong. And I am going to tell you that I want us to focus on right versus wrong. The reason that we are struggling right now in this country as it relates to people not trusting agencies, honestly, a lot of it is because of elected leaders. Let me tell you, one of the things that the chairman and I actually agree upon, we don't agree on a lot, is that we both know that there has been a sharp incline as it relates to threats upon our lives. Regardless of what side of the aisle you sit on, we both know and agree that as sitting members of Congress, we both are enduring more death threats than anybody should in this country. And I believe that it is because of the divisive rhetoric and it is because of the selective enforcement of things. And so when we have, and I'm gonna be clear, because I had remarks and I'm going a whole other way. To have the sitting attorney general go on, and I'm gonna call it faux news. I know some of y'all love it, but it's fake to me. To have her go on Fox News and to then decide that she wanted to send a threat to me, it was wrong. Because here it is, she is the highest law enforcement agent in this country, and people are watching and they are consuming this information and they are believing that simply because I decided that I wanted to exercise my right to free speech, which I am not abridged from doing, that she then wanted to then politicize something that should not be politicized. I don't like Elon Musk. I'm gonna say it 50,000 times. I don't like him. I don't like that he going out there and he firing people. I think that he's a crook because somehow the rest of us can't sit around and get whatever federal contracts we want. The rest of us can't sit around and get law enforcement and get them somehow ordained as federal law enforcement to protect him. The rest of us can't get our dealerships protected by the federal government. That is somebody that is operating above the law. For whatever reason, just because he has a lot of money, more money than everybody else. And yes, I am happy to see that on my birthday, which is what I said, there were peaceful protests around this world against him because he is a problem. And so you never should have somebody that is sitting that high and is going to sit up here and threaten a sitting member of Congress when she knew good and well, if she watched the entire thing, that I specifically told protesters to make sure you consult with lawyers, just like I've told protesters over and over and over in the history of me advising people to go out and exercise their constitutional right. The fact that there are other sitting members that have received letters of threat from this new DOJ tells me that they are about retribution and they are not about following the law. The reason that our party, or I won't even say our party, our country is torn apart is because we can't even agree on right versus wrong. This should not be left versus right. The only thing that we're asking is that we have law enforcement that will show up when there is an actual crime. If somebody calls and says, hey, I need you to investigate this cyber crime, or I need you to investigate this child pornography, or I need you to investigate this robbery, then we want somebody to show up, and we don't want them to look at us and act as if just because I'm black or because I'm woman, that I am not worthy of having that case investigated, because we have an administration that is continuously railing against diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we don't need people that show up that feel like diversity should not be valued. That is why we should have somebody that may show up and looks like me. The final thing that I'll say, because you've been gracious, is this. When I first became a public defender, I had no criminal defense experience. And I walked in and I told my boss, Charlie, I said, listen, you should hire me. He said, why? I said, because I'm black. Charlie looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, let me tell you something. When I walk in, I'm gonna walk in with a level of rapport and understanding that maybe some of my other colleagues will not. Charlie offered me my job, and I worked my butt off, and I worked really, really hard for all of my clients, not just those that look like me, and that is what it looks like to serve. Thank you.
She stood her ground, and she did it live, in front of the cameras. She called it exactly what it was, a threat. And not just a threat against her personally, but a warning sign to anyone in Congress or anywhere in America who dares to speak truth to authority. Because when the person sitting at the top of the Department of Justice decides to aim her words like weapons, it's not just rhetoric. It sends a message: fall in line or face consequences. But Crockett's answer flipped the script completely. She made it clear she has the same right to free speech as anyone else, and no attorney general gets to silence her. I'm not afraid to say what I believe, she said, her tone calm but sharp, the kind that cuts through political theater. And I'm not going to let anyone intimidate me out of doing my job. That's where everything shifted. The confrontation wasn't just about one interview, it became a test of principle. What happens when the people meant to uphold justice start bending it for politics? Crockett's stand hit a nerve because it tapped into something everyone feels, the fear that those in power no longer play by the same rules as the rest of us. She pointed to a disturbing trend, the surge in threats against lawmakers across the board. Both parties have seen it, and even her political opponents agree the danger has skyrocketed. But while others shrug it off as part of the job, Crockett linked it to something deeper, the kind of divisive rhetoric and selective enforcement that pits Americans against each other. She said what many have been afraid to say out loud, that when leaders use their platforms to target opponents instead of upholding the law, they're fueling the violence that follows. And she wasn't exaggerating. Every year security reports show that members of Congress are facing more and more direct threats, death threats, online harassment, even attempts on their lives. Crockett made the chilling point that words from powerful people have real-world consequences. When an attorney general attacks a lawmaker on national TV, that's not just political mudslinging, it's permission for chaos. It tells extremists that threats are fair game, that intimidation is an acceptable weapon. And that, Crockett warned, is how democracy starts to rot from within. But she didn't stop there. Crockett turned the lens on something even more explosive: America's obsession with wealth, influence, and the illusion that some people simply live above the law. And to prove it, she dropped one name that set the internet on fire: Elon Musk. She called him out bluntly, saying he'd used his money and status to shield himself from accountability, while ordinary citizens face consequences for far less. He's operating above the law, she said, because he can. She pointed out that Musk's companies get federal contracts, federal protections, and even law enforcement backing that no regular business owner could dream of. She said it's not about whether you love him or hate him, it's about fairness. Because no billionaire should get to rewrite the rules simply because they can afford to. And she added something that made her words go viral. On her own birthday, she watched people all around the world peacefully protest against him, calling it proof that people are finally waking up. You shouldn't have to be rich to be treated fairly, she said. That one line hit millions of views within hours. The deeper message wasn't just anti-elite, it was anti-corruption. Crockett wasn't attacking wealth itself, she was attacking the way power shields itself from accountability. She tied it all back to the Attorney General's remarks, saying that when top officials target dissenting voices while protecting their friends, they destroy the public's trust. We can't even agree on right versus wrong anymore, she said, her voice heavy but steady. This shouldn't be about left or right, it should be about the law. That single statement reframed everything. In a political landscape drowning in partisanship, Crockett drew the line where it actually matters, between right and wrong, not red and blue. She reminded viewers that justice isn't supposed to bend with the political wind, it's supposed to stand firm, even when it's inconvenient. And when leaders use the system for retribution, sending letters of threat, as she revealed, to sitting members of Congress, they're not enforcing the law, they're weaponizing it. That was the moment the hearing room grew quiet. Because everyone knew what she meant without her saying it outright. There's a new kind of fear growing in Washington, the fear that federal power can now be aimed like a spotlight at anyone who refuses to fall in line. Crockett wasn't speaking hypothetically. She said members of Congress have actually received letters that feel like warnings. Not requests for information, not legal inquiries, warnings. That's why her next line hit like a hammer. They're about retribution, not about following the law. But to show that her fight wasn't about politics, Crockett did something rare. She told a story from her own life. When she first became a public defender, she had zero experience in criminal defense. Most people would have kept quiet about that. But she walked into the office and told her boss straight up, "You should hire me." When he asked why, she said, "Because I'm black." The room laughed, but then she explained. Her point wasn't about tokenism, it was about understanding. "When I walk into a courtroom," she told him, "I bring an experience, a rapport and an empathy that others might not. That matters," and she proved it. She got the job and worked harder than anyone. She defended every client, those who looked like her and those who didn't, with the same energy and conviction. That personal story brought the entire argument home. Crockett showed that representation isn't a slogan, it's how justice actually works. When people from different backgrounds serve, the system becomes more fair, more accountable, and more human. Her message was crystal clear: diversity in government isn't about politics, it's about perspective, and perspective is what keeps justice honest. Then she zoomed out again, back to the national picture. She explained why her clash with Bondi wasn't just a headline. It was a warning about how fragile the balance of power has become. Congress makes the laws, she said. The executive branch enforces them. The courts interpret them. But when the people responsible for enforcement start targeting the lawmakers themselves, that's not just disrespect, it's a breakdown of the entire system. This wasn't just about one argument or one party. It was about preserving the idea that no one, no official, no billionaire, no government agency, stands above the law. Crockett's voice grew more intense as she spelled it out. When accountability disappears, justice collapses, and when justice collapses, so does democracy. Those words carried weight because they weren't shouted, they were spoken with the kind of quiet conviction that makes people stop scrolling and listen. She made it personal for viewers too. Because what she was really saying wasn't limited to Congress. It's about what happens when any ordinary citizen tries to hold power accountable, whether it's reporting corruption, calling out abuse, or simply speaking freely online. If those actions invite retaliation, then freedom becomes a privilege instead of a right. That's why Crockett kept returning to one phrase: we want law enforcement to show up when there's a crime. Not when there's political advantage, not when there's pressure from the top, but when justice demands it. That single line echoed everything she'd been building toward, the idea that fairness, not favoritism, is the foundation of democracy. When leaders turn law enforcement into a political tool, the whole system becomes hollow. Her words felt like a challenge to everyone watching: pay attention, because this is what it looks like when truth and power collide. As her remarks wrapped up, Crockett shifted from confrontation to reflection. She thanked the committee chair for allowing her to speak, and reminded everyone that public service isn't about prestige, it's about responsibility. I worked my butt off for my clients, she said. Not just the ones who looked like me, but for all of them. That line might have sounded simple, but it struck a chord. It reminded people that integrity isn't partisan, it's a choice, and that's what her entire speech represented, a choice to stand up when silence would have been safer. By the end, it wasn't just Crockett's composure that stood out. It was the clarity of her message. She had turned a moment of intimidation into a lesson on leadership. She had taken an attack and turned it into an argument for accountability. She showed what it means to serve the public, not power, because that's the real takeaway here. Accountability isn't about tearing others down, it's about reminding them that the rules apply to everyone, even the ones writing them. And when someone like Crockett refuses to be bullied, it sends a signal to every viewer: courage isn't loud, it's steady. In the end, she brought it all back to a single universal truth: democracy only survives when people care enough to defend it. Laws, institutions, and titles mean nothing without integrity behind them. Crockett's confrontation with Bondi will be remembered not for its drama, but for its message that no one, not the wealthy, not the connected, not even those at the top of justice itself, are untouchable. And that's why her words matter. Because if a single voice in Congress can remind millions that fairness still matters, maybe the system isn't broken beyond repair. Maybe it just needs people brave enough to demand better. So if you believe in accountability, if you think leadership should mean service, and if you're tired of watching the powerful act without consequence, then stay tuned. This isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of a bigger conversation. Subscribe, hit like, and share this video so more people can hear voices like this, voices that challenge authority, demand justice and refuse to be silenced. Because the moment we stop paying attention is the moment power wins.